Good evening from Philadelphia, and good morning and good day to all of our friends from around the world. My name is Amy Gadsden. I'm the Associate Vice Provost for Global Initiatives, and it's my pleasure to welcome you this evening, morning, day to our panel discussion today on resilience in the face of uncertainty, with a particular emphasis on advice and thoughts for international students. Before we start the panel officially, I thought I would talk a little bit about how this panel came to be, because I think it really exemplifies the best of Penn. About maybe 6 weeks ago, I was having a conversation with a group of alumni that included Ramanan Raghavendran, who you're going to hear from later this evening, talking about the school's pivot in the spring and our plans for the fall. And after a very lengthy presentation, Ramanan raised his hand on the chat and very kindly asked, he said, what can we do? What can we as alumni do for our international students? And he and I chatted a bit about that. And I thought, I think the best thing that we might be able to offer our international students during these challenging times is words of advice, words of inspiration, words of comfort. And I have been having regular conversations with Hugo Leo and Justine DeJesus, who you're going to hear from shortly, who are the heads of the Assembly of International Students. And I said to them, Hugo and Justine, how would you feel if we put together this panel and invited international students from around the world to dial in, not to, hear a very detailed plan for the fall or to get very specific advice on some of the challenges that are underway, but just to talk, just to share, just to think and reflect together. And they immediately embraced the idea and also reached out to Ramanan. And so that's how this panel came to be. And I think it's just a wonderful example of kind of how we work at Penn. For those of you who may be new to Penn this fall, for whom this is your, one of your first encounters with the university, I hope you take away from this discussion, lots of words of wisdom, lots of food for thought, but also a sense of how open our doors are. Whether it's my door, I guess it's not really a literal door anymore, it's a figurative door, a virtual door, but how open our doors are, whether it's my door in Penn Global, whether it's someone like Ramanan Raghavendran's door, who's one of our members of the trustees and alumni, whether it's Hugo and Justine's door as leaders among our international students. That's how we work, that's how we partner together. So I'm very excited that we're able to bring this panel to you tonight. We have a great discussion planned. We're hoping for a lot of engagement from our audience. It is my pleasure, I've alluded to them already, but to introduce Justine DeJesus and Hugo Leo, who are the leaders of the Assembly of International Students. Justine is a rising senior. I guess she's a senior now, originally from the Philippines, who majoring in neuroscience and kind of creative design, and Hugo Leo, who's in the Wharton School, who's a rising junior, originally from Indonesia. Hugo and Justine, take it away.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gadsden, for the introduction. And today, Hugo and I have the privilege of introducing our other presenter, Ramanan Raghavendran. Ramanan is a very active Penn volunteer, serving as a university trustee, overseer of the School of Arts and Sciences, and global coordinator of the Penn Alumni Interview Program. But he was an international student at Penn from India, and much of his Penn volunteer work has to do with international students, international alumni, and Penn's international activities, working closely with Penn Global, AIS, and other parts of Penn.
Great, thank you. Happy to be here.
Thanks, Justine. Thanks, Hugo. Hi, Ramanan. How are you?
Hi, Amy. I'm well and not as frazzled and busy as you, but still, life is full.
And where are you coming from today? Where are you beaming in from today?
So I live and work in the Bay Area, although, as you know, most of my Penn volunteer work is outside the United States. I've lived in the United States for most of the time since I graduated in 1989, and for the last 6 years I've lived and worked in the Bay Area, and here I am.
So
I came into the office for this call.
I am joining you from my living room, as you can see behind me. So before we get into the topic at hand, sort of resilience in the face of uncertainty and some of the students' questions, I thought it would be nice to give the participants a chance to get to know you better. You are such a wonderful kind of leader, figure, mentor to many of us on the campus who are focused on global engagement, both students, faculty, and administrators alike. But tell us a little bit, how did you get to Penn? How did you find out about Penn? What were your early Penn experiences like?
Thank you for asking that question. And I should say upfront, for those of you who've dealt with me in other settings, for this call, given the topic, I'm going to let all my hair down and get personal in ways that I don't always do in a forum like this. So, I got to Penn really through luck and serendipity. My father was a fighter pilot. We did not have a tradition of folks going overseas for college. I went to a very fine high school in New Delhi, but not a high school that was any kind of feeder to the US. I may have been the first person from my high school to ever apply to college in the United States. And, it was just luck. Penn was on the list, and I'll come back to the decision in one second. But I also did very well in the Indian system, which, as many of you know, is very examination driven. And I happened to do well in the exams. And so there was this set of Indian choices, and there was Penn. And this was the era before the internet, and all I had to go on was the brochure. And I would like all of you to know that Penn had a very nice brochure. And I made the decision. 95% of that decision was the brochure. And that was it. And I think sometimes we forget how.
I have to interrupt. What do you remember? Any of the pictures in that brochure?
So the pictures
what was the image that stuck with you?
So all the images were of Locust Walk, and because we have a Penn family on this call, you know that there's a lot more to Penn than Locust Walk, and some of the more building-oriented photographs may have not been as pretty, and they were not in the brochure. So I chose based on Locust Walk, and it was amazing. And the serendipity point is something I just want to touch on for a very personal reason, because sometimes we forget who brought us to the dance, so to speak. And the reality is the person who brought me to the dance at Penn was an admissions officer in Penn admissions who read my application and took a chance. And her name is Liz O'Connell, and I think Liz may actually be on this call. So that gives you a sense for the longevity of involvement here. And just one more comment. Penn was amazing. It changed my personality. It radically transformed my interests and my life trajectory. And we'll have more time to talk about these things later, but it also introduced me to a whole bunch of people who've been lifelong friends.
I think that's a great foundation to get us going. Talk a little bit about, why you chose Penn, what your experiences were like in your first, days and weeks and months. I sometimes I have a chance to talk to a lot of international faculty, right? Faculty at Penn who came originally as international students and stayed on in the United States, did graduate work, and are now senior faculty and deans and things like that. And I asked them to talk about their first night in the U.S. What was their first night like? And it's always an interesting story. So if you remember, your first days and nights.
I don't know if I can talk to my first night. I can certainly talk to my first month on the Penn campus, which was essentially my first time out of India. And it was radically different. I was 16. I came to Penn young.
Wow.
And it was just this amazingly different environment, and I need to be clear about this. It's not as though I landed on the Penn campus and I was frolicking down Locust Walk with happiness. It was an alien and very different environment for me. And 3 or 4 things I'd just highlight. My roommate, my freshman year roommate, and we were all chosen randomly, was John from Fairbanks, Alaska. And, I was a 16-year-old who'd just shown up from New Delhi, and he was just so kind and welcoming in his own way. It is not uncommon for international students in their freshman year to be hanging out with a lot of international students. And in that era, the percentage of international students was a lot smaller. So in that first month, while there weren't many of them, I got to know a lot of them. And so that was comforting. Freshman year academics came easier to me because I'd come out of the Indian system, the local Indian system. It took me till sophomore year to realize that this is hard. That college in the US, and I think a lot of international students make this mistake, they assume that college can carry on from their high school successes. And it's only in the sophomore year that I really understood how difficult it was. So my first month was John, my roommate, a small group of international students, many of whom, Amy, are still close friends. This is 35 years later. It's just mind-boggling. And one of my points to freshmen at Penn is whether on campus or virtual, which we will talk about, is you'd be surprised at how long you will know the people you are interacting with.
I often tell, I do have a lot of opportunities to talk to international students coming into Penn, but also Penn students who are going abroad, right? Those are the two sides of the house for Penn Global. And I tell our students who are preparing to go abroad that the international experience, particularly at this age, the sort of late teens, early 20s age, is an experience of stepping out of your own skin.
Yes.
You kind of go through your childhood and adolescence, and things seem immutable. They seem to be kind of given and certain in various ways. And the benefit of taking the opportunity to go overseas is that you get this chance to step outside of your own skin and see the world through entirely fresh eyes. And it sounds like that was what your first month may have been like, or maybe even longer. But and I can only imagine that for John from Fairbanks, Alaska, coming to Penn might have been as stimulating and as different for him as coming from New Delhi.
There's no doubt. I'll make one other comment, if I may. I think the other major learning for me coming from India in that era is I landed on the campus, and it was the first time I had met anyone from Pakistan. And during my freshman and sophomore years, I made real Pakistani friends. And this would be inconceivable if I stayed in India. And just our shared humanity and in many ways shared culture, that has also really stuck with me. I still have a couple of very close Pakistani friends. And I highlight that not to tout the virtues of universal brotherhood, more to say that exactly your point, which is you step out of the skin you're very used to and you begin to understand new things.
Well, I hope we could touch on that further as we go on in the conversation, because I think this particular time in our world, remembering that shared humanity is quite important. But I want to get back to something you said. You said, sophomore year, you realized college was hard. Going to University in the United States was hard. And of course, one of the things we're talking about here this evening is resilience and dealing with things that are difficult. So talk a little bit more about, what the experience was like for you. What was hard? How did you discover it was hard? And how did you cope with that?
And I'll respond with anecdotes from the university experience, but also beyond. Coming from India in that era, just a very examination-driven approach to life. And freshman year in that era at Penn had a lot of the more general courses where the results are also very examination driven. And I had my share of computer science courses, and computer science is very akin to math, right? There is one answer, so to speak. And I think it's only in sophomore year, as the courses got more advanced, that I really faced coursework, classmates, and faculty who were really challenging me on how to think and how to deal with fuzzy topics and fuzzy answers. And some of those, by the way, were in computer science, which, the moment you get beyond a certain level, even in an engineering subject or a science subject, you begin to see a lot of uncertainty. And it took me a year to figure that out, Amy. And it was not an easy year, right? Because I'd had a fantastic freshman year from an academic standpoint, and I had been brought up in the Indian setting where life was all about your academic achievements. And there were easy ways to measure it. And so it took me a year to figure that out, and it required changes in how I worked and how I studied. It also required some pretty deep psychological changes around being accepting of my own weaknesses and to acknowledge to myself that it was okay not to know something and it was okay to struggle, because no one person can be good at all things. As an aside, my children remind me of that every day now. And so this uncertainty, I guess that process maybe made me more able to embrace uncertainty later in my life. And I'll just touch briefly on my career, and without getting into too many specifics, many careers are straight lines. And most students at top tier universities have followed a straight line to get there. And so they assume the rest of their life might be the same, whether at college or beyond. And mine has been vine to vine, like Tarzan. I went from Penn to consulting to venture capital to buyouts, took 2 whacks at doing business in India. Then I moved to Silicon Valley in middle age to build a unique kind of VC firm. These were all dramatic changes. And I want to amplify, when I say it like that, it sounds like I went from one accomplishment to another. In fact, I usually went from one stable thing to one of extreme uncertainty. And so the moral of all this that I've rambled on here about is the first year or 2 of college is potentially the last time in your life that you will have near complete certainty about most things. I think it's entropy or chaos. It increases as life goes on. And I think the people who lead fulfilling and rich lives are people who embrace the uncertainty and learn to manage the chaos. And I think my Penn years actually helped me do that, especially that transition from freshman year onward. So I hope that gives a fuller picture.
I love the image of you swinging vine to vine. I can see it. For those who don't know, Ramanan is also a very talented athlete, so I think swinging vine to vine would certainly be in his workout regimen. I want to continue with this theme because obviously our students who are listening tonight are in a very difficult spot, regardless of what they've chosen to do, regardless of what may be chosen for them. Things aren't going as planned, right? And one of the things that I marvel at with our international students is the amount of kind of forethought and planning that it takes to come from overseas to Penn is quite remarkable. It is, I'm blown away. Hugo and Justine have heard me talk about this. I mean, especially for our undergraduates, but also for our graduate students. I mean, it's years of planning, right? It's not as if you could wake up in March of one year and say, well, I think I'll enroll at Penn and be there in September of the fall, that same year. It is years of planning and preparing, both academically, financially, and also emotionally, to make this huge leap. And of course, right now, all of that planning is being challenged. And so, what are your thoughts? Dare I say, what's your advice? In thinking about when your plans are changed. You talked about, going from stable to unstable, certainty to uncertainty. Sometimes that's a choice, and sometimes it's not a choice. And just based on your experience, what have you found are the skills you need to respond well in uncertainty?
Boy, that's a hard and deep question. And I'll try taking it. And then I want to be clear because I will answer it by first saying that at least some of the transitions I've made in my career, have been choices that were forced on me, right? In at least one case, it was just clear that the thing I was doing was a very difficult thing that was not going to end in success. And I had to sit there and make a very difficult set of decisions around what I wanted to do next. And I vividly remember where I was and when I finally understood that this is the right way to think about it. I was on the banks of a river in Singapore. This was 8 years ago. And the things I concluded were, number one, and this is, I think, the most important piece of advice that I can give. I can only control the things I can control. And the things I can control, I can do something about, and I should arrange them such that they conspire in progressing my goals and dreams. But there are a lot of things I cannot control, and allowing those things to occupy my mental space is just a recipe for anger and heartbreak. And I fully realize as I'm saying this, that this is easy to say. And it was not easy for me to do at that time. But the things that were in my control were, whom do I want to be in business with? Where is it I want to live? And can I in fact live there? And what are the kinds of things I want to be doing? Virtually everything else was not in my control. The likelihood of success, just a range of things. And I'm going to tie it to modern student life. And the tie to modern student life is you can't control the US's decisions on immigration policy. Don't let that consume your brain. Find ways to push your goals ahead, knowing what you know about what you can control, and knowing that you can't change American immigration policy. There's lots of people working on changing it, but you can't change it. What you can do is change maybe how you choose to spend your time. You can change whom you choose to interact with. You can change the kinds of things you want to learn. These are all things in your control. And the less time you agonize about things not in your control, I think the better off you're going to be. And I feel like I didn't really begin to do this well until I was in my early 40s. So I have tremendous sympathy if you're 18 and trying to solve this. But, when I was 18, I didn't have someone like me telling me how to deal with all these things. And, John from Alaska was not helping me out. So there you go.
I'm hoping we can find John and we could do a reunion episode.
John's in my life. John's in my life. I know where to find him.
So, all right, control what you can control. So I want to make sure I know this is on the minds of a lot of our students because there is, there are the questions about immigration. And we're going to talk later on in this discussion about kind of how to maximize this uncertain year, with lots of things online, with the challenges of kind of maybe not having a lot of opportunities to get together in person or participate in person and things. But I know what's also on our students' minds are their plans after Penn. Right. That is an important kind of focal point for most Penn students. They are an ambitious bunch, and they want to both succeed in school and succeed in their professional plans after school. And so I was hoping you could talk about how to frame this uncertain period in a job search. I mean, how to frame it in one's, kind of personal narrative around the trajectory they've taken to get to their next step, and how to talk to employers about things like, courses that may or may not be able to be taken, decisions that may or may not be able to be made in the same way. How would you reflect on that for students who are thinking about how is this going to impact my professional steps after Penn?
I mean, and I wish there was one ring to rule them all, right? An answer that would solve everyone's problems. There isn't one, but I can give you some of my thoughts and maybe guidelines on how to think about it. Number one, just as students are reflecting on what is life after Penn and how do I think about jobs or summer internships, and we take on a lot of summer interns here. And so I have a window, and there's at least one of my summer interns is actually on this call. So she will call me out if I say anything that isn't 100% correct. I would say this element of your search should be unchanged because of the pandemic. If you came to Penn and you want to be a historian, there is no reason the pandemic should change that. If you came to Penn and you wanted to work on Wall Street or in Silicon Valley, there is nothing about the pandemic that should change that. I think the muscle I would really urge everyone to build, because I think the world is going to be this way, and not just in the US, for a while. The muscle you have to build is the ability to be an effective professional in a remote environment where you're not in a physical office. Physical offices, there's a very complex academic set of treatises on office buildings and the discipline they impose on employees, all of which, by the way, I agree with, right? These are fields of power. In many ways, you've been liberated. You don't need to schlep into an office. And so, but you can't not schlep into an office and be ineffective as a remote worker. That is not a good outcome. And so I think in the world that we're in, the ability to be very effective and self-disciplined and productive in remote settings is going to be a vital element of your success at college and beyond, no matter what you choose to do. You could be a sociologist, an anthropologist, a Wall Street trader, or a software engineer. This ability to work productively by yourself in a remote setting is going to be an essential element of success. And a whole army of productivity software and tools and networks has risen up to help people with that. So that would be a muscle I would urge you to develop.
So I want to ask just a bit more, because what do you think makes someone effective in a remote setting? You talked about being productive by yourself.
Yeah.
But what are the characteristics that you think define someone as effective in a virtual world?
It's really interesting, Amy. That's a really good question, and
I'm taking notes too.
It ties back to my general view. No, I don't know about that. Well, first of all, send the children away. That's number one on the list.
I don't think our students have to worry about that.
I can't. Exactly. It's really interesting. I actually think there is nothing like a great liberal arts education to make you effective in remote work, because it demands two things of you: the ability to focus, because you need that if you're studying the humanities or the social sciences to, in my view, a greater degree than many other things. And the second is it imposes a high degree of capability in written communications. When you're working remotely and not down the hall or down the cubicle, your ability to communicate effectively in written form, the importance of that just went up 10x in the last 6 months. And I see it every day in my work, and you would not look at venture capital and say, it really makes sense that I have a history major to work in venture capital. And, surprise, surprise, it turns out that the research capabilities, the writing capabilities that come with the liberal arts. So for those of you who are not liberal arts majors, Penn imposes a lot of liberal arts courses on you. I think you really want to take advantage of that to develop the writing skills and also the ability to do focused research. So that's my long-winded answer to the qualities that are required to be effective in remote work. But coming back to the job front, just so I'm complete, I don't think you should change your career goals and where you want to go because of the pandemic. Not at all. I think you should think about how to be truly productive in remote work. And that could be for college for the next 1, 2, 3 years, 4 years, and it'll be beyond. That is time really well spent. And I think people who do it well will have a huge advantage. And the third piece, as you're thinking about preparing yourself for a world, because even after the pandemic is over, a lot of companies will be very distributed and remote work oriented. I would urge you to develop your writing skills. I think the importance of great writing skills just went up 10x.
It's an interesting perspective. I mean, what you're saying is that, in fact, people in college, in graduate school now, and certainly in high school even, will have an advantage potentially because they'll have this opportunity to be remote in these higher education learning settings. Yes. That will serve them well in professional settings that will probably also continue to be remote once, or have virtual elements once the pandemic has passed.
Absolutely.
So you can sort of see the upside. We're talking a lot about silver linings these days, but
this is a real silver lining. It's not just make lemonade out of lemons. It is, you're going to develop skills that are going to last you for the rest of your life. However, it's important that you develop those skills.
Right.
You have the opportunity to develop those skills. Now you got to develop those skills.
For those of you who are wondering about the writing seminar, embrace it. So I'm taking notes, as I said, and I just want to sort of recap for the audience a couple of the kind of concepts, mantras that you've thrown out. Control what you can control. And I'm phrasing this next one, feel like you can stick with your plans. I think that's actually something people have not talked a lot about in the midst of this pandemic. Everybody feels like their plans have been upended. And I think your advice is very sound, which is, you can stick with your plans. It may not be the same road to get there, but you can still be on the road, even if it's a different road.
You can absolutely be on the road. And I'd like to say one more thing on this topic. If someone told me today, you could take a semester or a year off from Penn, I would view it as the best thing that ever happened. At the time, I would have thought it's a catastrophe. Oh my God, I'm 1 year more away from all that I want to do. If you end up, for whatever reason, and some of you may be in time zones where you feel, look, coming to Penn during this period may or may not make a whole lot of sense, then embrace that year off. Make the absolute most of it. And when you're 50, you will look back and say, wow, I can't believe that stroke of luck.
I think that is our shared generational, retrospective feeling, because I similarly think if I could have an extra year of college, wouldn't that be wonderful?
That would be amazing.
We have a lot of questions coming through in the chat. I know that Hugo and Justine are looking at those. Hugo and Justine, any questions you want to put to Ramanan?
One of the first questions.
Sure. So I can start.
Go for it, Hugo.
Go for it. Oh, okay. So this first question is for Ramanan. And so the question is coming from Serena Tam, a Penn undergrad, and she asked, you once told me to triple down on the US, that despite the signs of shifting geopolitical power in the world, I, as an international student, should still bet on the US. Do you still agree with this now, given the various new hostile policies towards international students in both immigration and job search, and the current coronavirus situation in the US?
Right. Well, this is an extremely complex question, and in order to answer it, I'm going to have to speak for several minutes, for which my apologies to all. I'll keep an eye on the clock and make sure I don't be out of control here. First, Serena's a fine college student, so she studied history and political science, so I'm going to drill into some of the history. Let's start with immigration. I mean, we have to understand the incredible level of immigration since the 1965 Immigration Act and its effect on U.S. society. 15% of U.S. residents are now foreign-born. And just to give you a little comparison that may help you, China is 0.1%. For the U.S., it was just 4.5% in 1965. So 45 million U.S. residents are foreign-born. In 1965, that number was like 9 million. More than that, even more than that, the dramatic rise in immigration in just the last decade is actually kind of incredible. From 600,000 a year in 2010 to north of 1 million.
I think we've lost Ramanan. Have we? Hugo, are you there? You can hear me, right?
Oh. Yeah, I can.
Okay. Sometimes you never know when it freezes, if it's you or everyone else. Ramanan's back. I can see Ramanan's back. Maybe having some challenges.
Hey, guys.
All right. I hear now you're back, Ramanan.
Okay. I just switched internets. So I think I was in the middle of talking about immigration. So, what I was saying was American society has changed in ways that make a lot of places people uncomfortable. And I think what is unnatural is the incredibly incendiary rhetoric that takes a genuine issue and makes it far worse, and the effect of pandemic on travel. But the point I would try and, it's difficult when you are the person being affected. I would just highlight that the US has been incredibly welcoming of immigration, and in the long arc of history will remain incredibly welcoming compared to virtually any other major society or civilization you can think of. And I would not think of some of these recent policies as hostile in some deep sense. You don't like these policies. I don't like these policies. Many of them are irrational and harmful to the United States. But I think the question we can all debate is what level of immigration can a society sustain without causing cultural backlash? And look, the American democracy is chaotic at the best of times. And what this means is that policymaking also has an element of chaos, especially in this administration. And I believe over the next 2 to 5 years, we will find the right balance. So this is a long way of answering one section of Serena's question, in which she speaks about these new hostile policies. And I just ask that we place all of this in a cultural setting, in a cultural context. Second, I'll try and be done in the next 3 minutes, guys. Second, a unipolar world is very rare. And we lived through a 2-decade period in which it was just the United States. I grew up in India, as you guys know, and I came to the Penn in 1985 when the Soviet Union still existed. And growing up in New Delhi in the late 70s and 80s, the Soviets were the equal of the United States in influence, in all kinds of other things. Then I showed up in the US. In the late 80s, the Japanese were literally apparently going to own the United States. I think at one point in that time, a Japanese conglomerate ended up owning Rockefeller Plaza, which is this iconic symbol of the United States. And so I had several friends who learned Japanese, which has proven singularly unhelpful to their careers. But it seemed like the right thing to do at the time. And now China. So I've seen this movie many times. The inevitable decline of the United States has been predicted many, many times. And so the feedback I would give you and the context for the triple down comment is don't react to what you see as the state of affairs now. Make an educated assessment of what the state of affairs will be in 10 or 15 years. And I think you may come to a very different conclusion. And, related to that, because I want to be careful about how some of these comments come across, it's not a zero-sum game, right? We want the entire world to prosper. It's not as though Japan lost the battle. It is a wonderful, powerful culture and society, and so there's going to be many winners here, is I guess say. Okay, let me end this long philosophical point and come directly to your question, which is, does tripling down on the U.S. make sense? Let's break it up. On the decision to come here for an undergraduate or a graduate degree, this is no debate. A four-year top-tier American undergrad education is unmatched anywhere else in the world. Nothing comes even close. The diversity and flexibility of the degree, which is in the DNA of how U.S. colleges work, the diversity of the student body you interact with, the career options that open up, this is actually a very easy decision. For a job, your first job in particular, I think all of the logic around undergraduate school applies here as well, and so I won't go through it again. For a career is where it gets more complicated. What excites you? Well, what do you view as compelling? If you're a student from Hungary and you want to be in public service in your home country, well, you should be back there sooner rather than later. I'm being a little glib, but you get the point. You have to think about what kind of career you want. And the more country-centric it is, the more appropriate it is that you get back to that country. And then the final component is for a life. And I obviously have chosen for myself. So I'm speaking from that vantage. And I think this is the most complicated decision of them all. But I can give you some guidelines that I paid attention to. You should seek to stay and build a life in the United States and it's one or more of the next 5 bullets. If you want to live in a heterogeneous society with tremendous diversity, this is the place. If the values that the US is a beacon for, whatever those values may be, right? And you may conclude that the values it's currently being a beacon for are not your values, but if you do believe in those values, I think if you want to start a business with very little influence or connections, this is the place. I think if you want an academic career which requires unfettered freedom of speech, and this is not true for all academic careers, then this is the place. And then the final one will put a smile on your faces. If you do not belong to the elite in your home country and you want to run for public office, you want to be in the United States. You just have to look at the number of foreign-born US Congress people and compare that to foreign-born anything anywhere else, and you will arrive at a set of enlightening conclusions. In conclusion, if these 4 or 5 things, some subset of them applies to you, I think you should put them out in the US. If they don't, you should.
Such an incredibly powerful answer, Ramanan. I feel like I want to cast my vote for you in November. That could be the subject of another conversation. But no, thank you for that incredibly thoughtful and personal and powerful response. Justine, is there a question that you see that you want to put to the panel?
Sure. This next question actually kind of goes back to what you just said, but we have an audience member asking, what makes you stay in America compared with India, but also compared to other countries?
Oh man, I thought these were going to be a bunch of softball, easy questions, and each one requires thoughtfulness. Well, I have thought about this a lot, right? Because, I had choices, and at various points in my life, I could have been back in India, I could have been in other places, London, Singapore, and I very much, in middle age, I made of my own volition, I made a very intentional decision to be in the United States. And the reason, Justine, is everything I just mentioned, with the exception of the last one about public office, applies to me. I want to be in a heterogeneous society with tremendous diversity. And the US gives me that in ways that really, there's only 1 or 2 other countries that fit that description. I think the US is just a beacon for values that I prize. Sometimes because only bad news sells. Sometimes the news that you read just shows things that are happening that are tectonic shifts. I'll give you a simple example. There's lots of rhetoric about this administration and how horrible it is. But it is during this period, perhaps in reaction, that we've had the Me Too movement and the BLM movement. those didn't show up in the previous 50 years of civil rights activism. The degree to which those have become prominent. And it brings home the point I'm trying to make is, these are values that I prize. And then third, I have built an entrepreneurial career here in the US with no influencer connections. And I love the fact that I can say whatever I want. That is a very important thing for me. I have been in places where you can't say whatever you want. I hope that helps.
I would also just add, for the benefit of the audience, and this is not in any way to minimize the incredible challenges that are washing over the United States in these recent months and years. And yes, in coming to Penn, you are coming to the United States, but you are also coming to Penn, and Penn is a unique place. We are a thriving academic campus in the middle of the city, in the middle of West Philadelphia. And we are a global campus. And we talk about being a global campus from the minute you step foot onto Locust Walk, onto the Penn campus, right? It's not just international students who have a global experience at Penn. It is every student that has a global experience at Penn, because we are an international global community, thriving in amongst ourselves. And Penn is deeply committed to championing what international students and scholars bring to our campus and to our country. And so, whereas you may be reading headlines that make you uncomfortable, that are unpleasant to read, and I certainly read those headlines and those articles, know that that is not what the sentiment is at the University of Pennsylvania. It could not be more polar opposite, and frankly, it comes from the top down. The president of the university, Amy Gutman, is deeply committed to supporting international students and scholars, and to making sure that their contributions, talents, and the vitality of their being on the Penn campus is recognized. So know that you will have a warm welcome on the Penn campus, regardless of what you might read in the paper or what you might experience elsewhere.
And for those of you who end up dealing with Penn, especially if you're an incoming freshman and you elect to be remote and virtual and online, when you get admitted to Penn and you become a Penn student, you don't just get an education and all that goes with learning, although that has obviously tremendous value. Penn's part of you for life. You belong. And, at some point here, I'm going to write a long rambling post on belonging. You will be 50, 70, 90 years old, and your Penn affiliation, the fact that you went here, is going to be a vital element of your identity. For those of you who, and I'm sure many of you will have obituaries in the New York Times, your Penn degree will be very prominent in it. That's a bit of a morbid thought, but, let's hold on to that thought. The point I'm trying to make is, because I've been getting some, well, if it's all online, then, I can just go to YouTube or words to that effect. It's not the learning, right? That's the basis, that's the foundation. It's the cohort, it's the friends you make, many of whom you will now make online, and you will find they're still pretty close friends. So that lies ahead for you, and I urge you to embrace it. And that's one part of turning a lemonade into lemons, is saying, okay, it's not the same as having coffee with my dorm mate. It's a different form of bonding and relationship building, but it will lead to friendships in their own right.
I want to make sure we get more questions from the audience. Hugo, do you have another question?
Yeah, sure. So this question has come up quite a lot, and I guess both Amy and Ramanan, you can take a shot at it. But some students are wondering, what advice would you give to your freshman selves?
It's a great question, and Amy was a freshman, I was a freshman, and we can both take a whack at it. I'd say two or three things, and these are all easy to say, and only one doesn't require very much mental gymnastics. The first is, be less anxious about the outcomes and focus more on the experience. And when I deliver that advice to students, I invariably couple it with don't overload on courses. Taking too many courses is the enemy of a great college experience. And by the way, this is speaking as someone who took too many courses. So I speak from live experience. The second thing I touched on briefly, but I'm just going to repeat it. You're 17, 18, 19, you're meeting lots of random people. The frightening thing is you will know them all when you're 50 years old. So you may as well, be intentional about making new friends. They will last you your lifetime and will be rewarding to you in ways that you cannot imagine now. And then the final piece of advice is I'd maybe look to be more adventurous in your academic choices. And I specifically state this for STEM students. I'm absolutely convinced that phenomenal research and writing skills are going to be a critical element of success over the remainder of this century. So I would urge you to master those skills. Stay with the STEM major, but master these skills as well.
I think those are all great pieces of advice. I was not a STEM major, so I guess I don't have to correct the error of my ways. I was a liberal arts major through and through, with a double major in English and history. But I would echo in some ways what Ramanan said. In doing a double major, more than two-thirds of my credits were tied up in the major.
Right.
I needed 36 credits to graduate, 26, and this was not at Penn, at another school. 26 of them, I remember still, were in those two majors. So I only had the opportunity to take 10 electives, true electives. And when you have distributional requirements to just complete your degree, it gets
right.
even more narrowly sliced. I wish that I had, had the courage in some ways not to double major. I thought that was lacking. I thought somehow the double major proved that I was a more serious student, a more rigorous student. And this is going to sound counterintuitive, but I think if I had not double majored, I would have focused more. I was too scattered because I was fulfilling all of these different requirements for all of these different majors. And I came out of undergrad and thought, I don't really know anything about anything. I know a little bit of European history and I know a little bit of American history, and I had to take this distribution requirement. And so I ended up doing a PhD, which is the exact opposite of what I did in my undergraduate experience, because I really wanted to dive deep. And so if I was giving advice to my freshman self, it would be to, and it's hard when you don't know where you want to dive, but I wish that I had allowed myself to dive a little bit deep. And I worked at Penn Law School for 5 years, and I counseled a lot of law students. And law school is a similar experience where you can be very scattered across a law curriculum, and there's no expectation that you specialize in anything in law school. But for the students who had come to see me who were frustrated by that, who were anxious about that, I would say, find 4 parts of your academic experience, academic and extracurricular experience, that speak to each other, that create a narrative for you where you have some specialization around what those things are. So it could be a class you take, a club you join, a study abroad opportunity that you do, and then a follow-on, in-depth seminar, right? And those 4 classes, they may not all be in the 4 things. They may not all be in the same department. They may not be part of the same major, but they speak to each other in a way that makes sense to you in your interests. So I think that's some advice that I would offer. and also get to know a faculty member.
Yes.
It's hard. Faculty members can be intimidating. Penn is a big place. It's not a small, cozy, warm, rural college where everybody might know everybody. But make a point of, connecting with a faculty member. Don't be afraid to go to their office hours. Don't be afraid to say, I don't have any pressing questions. I just wanted to ask you more about how you became interested in this topic, how your career evolved, something like that. You don't have to have, the smartest question to walk into office hours. You can just use it as an opportunity to get to know someone. And I did not do that, and I deeply regretted it.
Could not agree more. Complete agreement.
Justine, do you have another question from the field?
Sure. This next question kind of goes back to this idea of virtual learning and navigating a virtual environment. So how do you maintain social skills and stay sane while working remotely?
Well, my approach is to do as many Penn webinars as possible. So Amy and I are going to be talking every day for the next 1 year. No. This actually comes, Justine, this goes to the heart of what I actually said is going to be a defining skill for the rest of your life, which is how to be productive when you're remote, right? Because, and I framed it in the context of being productive at remote work, but obviously to be productive at remote work, you need remote work-life balance.
Right.
And I think the answer is you need to develop the ability to be social in a virtual setting, which I think comes easier to some students than others. And what you define as being social in a virtual setting is also different from student to student. Some students may just find doing lots of text-based messaging as sufficiently social. Others may require that visual connection. I think we're humans. We're a social species. You need some level of socially distanced physical interaction. If you're on campus, I have little doubt that you will find all kinds of ways to achieve that during the semester that is in keeping with Penn's requirements. If you're in Jakarta, your socializing with Penn students is going to be virtual. And I actually view that as an important element of long-term success here. You should almost think of it as a skill that you build and inculcate. For me, and for Amy, because I'm being very interested in her response, yes, we have our families around us who are driving us bonkers on a daily basis, so that we have that in our lives. But I have found during this time, I have regular happy hours with lots of friends. Not many of them are one-on-one. Whether it's a coffee or some other adult beverage, we get together virtually, and there's, we're actually calmer and less frazzled, and some of my virtual hanging out with friends have been deeper than my in-person hangout. So I think you can be intentional in all kinds of ways here and be very sane about it.
And I would just add, over the preceding months, you've been receiving emails from Provost Pritchett. Some of you probably have glossed over that and wondered, what is a provost? Who is this guy who keeps sending me emails? Provost Pritchett is the chief academic officer of the university. All the deans report to him. I report to him. And I think he offered some great advice recently on this question. It's framed a little bit differently, but I think it's actually going to be of great value to students this year. And he said, this isn't the year for thinking big in terms of big events, big activities. Penn students love to organize conferences. They love to organize events. They love to organize the AIS winter ball. They love, I mean, it's all about a big thing, getting everyone together, kind of making us, the hackathon, getting everyone in the room at the same time. This is not going to be the year for everyone to get in the room at the same time. This is going to be the year for small interactions, for single scale interactions. So how can you make that work? How can you join a club and do the work of the club on an individualized basis? How can you focus on maybe outputs, web-based activities, written products for that club, as opposed to the big event that you might have done every year? Maybe it's the year when you pursue, doing some research with a faculty member through CURF. Maybe it's the year where you write something based on your scholarly work, your scholarly pursuits. We all have to make this adjustment to thinking about how we can be effective in our pursuits in a world where the definition of effective is not, I got 100 people to come and be part of this thing with me, because that has been a very important metric up until this point. But I think that these other ways of engaging, kind of on the individual level, on the personal level, to Ramanan's point, are equally important, maybe more important in some ways, and are the best complement to the kind of big things that we're all used to doing. So I think, if you're trying to figure out how can I have a productive year outside of my classes, think about the things you can do on the small scale with one faculty member, with a small group of students, with a written product, with a web-based product, with a video product that, might not have been where you would have focused your energies earlier, but you could do it now. Well, we have reached our time. Hugo and Justine, final questions?
Hugo, come back. We miss you.
I was like, I can knock one out if you don't have one. But
Right.
if you one last question you want to ask.
Yeah. Perhaps, Amy, perhaps you could go for that question.
All right, so Ramanan, I'm sure you get this question all the time. I'm going to turn it on its head. I'm not going to ask you what was the best class you took at Penn. I'm going to ask you what was the worst class you took at Penn.
That is not hard to answer, Amy, because it's the one course I got a D in. Let me say the letter D, which I don't know if you crack Penn students know, D is not a great grade. It is, in fact, one step above an F. And it was legal studies, I think legal studies 001 or something. And I just hated it. It was a wonderful professor. The weird thing is I now know a lot about legal stuff because it comes with the investment business. But that is a great example of a point you made earlier, which is, you dual majored, I dual degreed, and all the requirements for one degree were used, all the electives for one degree were used to fulfill the other degree. And so I ended up taking courses in a bunch of subjects that were really a waste of my time at college. I should have taken more history courses. That's just the bottom line. And I blew it in some respects. So to fix that problem, as you know, 20 years later, guys, I came back to Penn as a part-time MLA student, which is Penn's Master of Liberal Arts, which you can do part-time as a working professional. And you take a bunch of liberal arts courses, graduate level liberal arts courses. That was life-changing. I wouldn't have needed to do that if I'd just done them all as an undergraduate. And so that was the worst class, not the fault of the professor, not the fault of the subject. It was just not what I should have been studying in college.
I guess we don't often get to reflect on the low points as much as we do on the highs, so I thought I would throw that curveball on there.
I like it.
Well, this has been a wonderful conversation. Ramanan, we can't thank you enough, not just for being here this evening, but for all that you do for the University of Pennsylvania, And as I said, for all of us, students, staff, faculty alike, you are a great inspiration and a friend and a wonderful kind of boost in the arm, wind in the sails for all the work that we're doing to ensure that the university is global. And
Thank
Hugo
you.
and
Thank you,
Justine.
Amy. Thank you for having me, and thank you for being my partner in crime as I've gone along here, and for the kind of insane job you're doing at this time.
It's a pleasure, as I've said on a couple of occasions this summer. It's really an honor to represent these issues at the university. But I want to make sure to thank Hugo and Justine, who have been such tremendous leaders in AIS, going back several years now. But in the last year, they've really kind of risen to the leadership challenge. It could not have been more difficult for them this spring and into the summer. But they are as committed as ever to championing the interests and issues that impact all of our international students. And I'll close where I began, which is to say that for those of you who have hung on with us this evening, our doors are open. My door is open. The door of ISSS is open. The doors in Penn Global are open. The doors in AIS are open. And dare I say, even our illustrious board members' doors are open.
Yes.
So please connect with us. Let us know what's on your mind. Come seek us out. It's been a pleasure to be part of this conversation tonight, and I look forward to welcoming you all virtually and eventually in person to the University of Pennsylvania.
Thanks,
Good night,
guys.
everybody.
Thanks, Hugo. Thanks, Justine. Bye.